I hate when things refresh, and then like it decides it's going to reload the notes you're actively trying to read from. All right, here we go. So this is going to be the end of public policy. This is chapter 14, part 3. We're going to talk about social policy today, which kind of covers inequality, welfare, health, education, and who government should help. The big idea for today is that social policy is where public policy becomes most visible in people's lives. So our first section is our connection. Last class, we talked about the economy, growth, jobs, and inflation. Today, we're going to talk about how the government tries to help individuals and groups within the economy. Economic policy manages the system, whereas social policy decides how people experience that system. So what is social policy? Social policy is where government actions designed to promote well-being, reduce hardship, and expand opportunity. Examples include income support, healthcare, education, housing, food assistance, and unemployment support. Social policy is often about individual outcomes rather than system-wide economic performance. Social policy is where government decisions show up directly in people's lives. So why does government create social programs? There's competing reasons for this. There's not one answer, but there's several answers. One is that there's a safety net. This is going to protect people from extreme hardship. 2 is opportunity. We're going to give people a chance to succeed. 3, fairness and redistribution. It's going to reduce the inequality or correct disadvantages. 4 is economic stability. This support demand during downturns. And then 5 is public investment. Build long-term capacity like education and health. Different people emphasize different goals, and that drives disagreement. People often agree that problems exist, but they disagree about who's responsible for it and how we should fix it. I think that the government has a duty to take care of people. We have social policy because of that whole concept of a social contract. The government is doing their job according to that contract by taking care of people who are not able to, at the moment, take care of themselves. Now, why do I feel this way? Well, if I were a hunter-gatherer and I didn't like the situation I was in, I could move. I could go take things. I could go, if I were strong enough sort of thing, kill my neighbor and take what they've got. That sort of thing is unacceptable in society. So the trade-off is that we have systems that take care of people who are not able to use the only things at their disposal. If, for example, you aren't highly educated, you're not highly skilled, things like that, you're not going to maybe be able to access the same things as other people are able to access. So it's kind of the government's job to help people gather those skills, to get the education, to, be on the same footing as everybody else. Otherwise, the whole concept of a social contract doesn't make sense. Do we as citizens just exist to pay taxes, or should we get something out of this deal too? So that's my kind of philosophical view of it. I'm working on it. I'll refine it to something that sounds good, probably in like another 6 years. But at the moment, that's my philosophical reason why social policies are important. So types of social policy. There are 2 broad categories that we're going to talk about first. Universal versus targeted programs. Universal programs are available to broad populations. They're simpler and often more politically stable. Means-tested programs, for example, targeted to people with lower income or specific need, more efficient targeting, but more politically contested. Directed versus indirected. So that is universal versus targeted. So now we get to directed versus indirected. Direct payment is cash or services, benefit programs, for example. Indirect is a tax credit, incentive, or subsidy. So let's go through a couple of examples of this. A universal program might be, for example, that all insurance plans must cover birth control. It's a universal social policy decision, and therefore it's pretty easy to put into place. It's just, this is the way it is. Versus a means-tested program, for example, which is going to be Medicaid. It only is available to people who make under a certain amount. Direct versus indirect support, an example of this, so cash or services, benefit programs. This is going to be food stamps versus indirect. For example, when we talk about child tax credits, if you have a kid, this is going to be targeted, and it is going to be an indirect benefit because you only really get that if you've paid taxes to claim it. And you're not getting the money in your pocket, you're just getting to pay less taxes. All right, entitlements versus discretionary spending. Entitlements are where people receive benefits if they qualify under law. Discretionary funding is funding must be approved each year. An entitlement would be something like a Pell Grant. It's probably time that you guys are doing financial aid again. A Pell Grant says if you meet this criteria, you get this money from the government. Whereas discretionary funding is going to be something more like a scholarship. If you're selected, you get this. The main point here is that different program designs reflect different values and trade-offs. How a program is structured tells you what policymakers value: simplicity, targeting, stability, or control. So what are some of the major areas of social policy? We're going to talk about 4 major areas, but there are probably more. One is going to be income support or welfare. This is assistance to individuals or families. This is not very popular. It is highly debated. The debates typically center around dependency versus support, and incentives versus protection. And we have a system that's kind of messed up, because the amount of Medicaid that we are going to give somebody, it's just enough. Like, nobody's getting rich off of Medicaid. It's just enough to survive. And what happens if you decide, okay, I want to try and get out of this loop. I'm going to go get a job at McDonald's or any entry-level position to make money. Well, you quickly lose your Medicaid. And so now you have traded one unsustainable income for another unsustainable income. But you've also lost things. If you're a part-time employee at McDonald's, you are not getting insurance, for example. You probably make enough that you don't qualify for Medicaid, and therefore you lose your Medicaid insurance, but you're actually bringing home less than you would have brought home if you were on Medicaid. The problem is that people are terribly afraid of people taking advantage of the system or somehow getting a free ride. Again, the problem with this is that there's no real off-ramp. There's no, okay, we're only going to start touching your income when you're making 150% of what you would have been making on Medicaid or something like that. There's no way to, with how it's set up, to easily transition off of it. And the government makes it ridiculously difficult to get it and to be on it and to change, things like that. For example, I worked with a client who got a job, and they came to me because they wanted to try and get the government to stop sending them money. They're like, I have a job. I know I make too much. I need them to stop doing this because I'm not entitled to it anymore. Can you help me make them stop? And the answer was, no, nobody would help us do that. What we ended up doing is setting up a trust account. We got 6 months or so of their payments that went into that before the government was like, oh, we've been overpaying you. And it's like, yeah, no shit. We tried to get you to do that 6 months ago. But then they're like, can you just give us back all this money? And it's like, yeah, we can, but most people wouldn't be able to. Luckily, this guy was on top of it. Similarly, I had a client once that was an adult, lived on their own and everything, and had a pretty profound mental illness. Obviously was going to qualify for Medicare. Difference between Medicaid and Medicare is this. Medicaid is aid, usually temporary, that we give people who can't afford things right now. Medicare is the care that we give to the elderly and disabled because they can't get it on their own. Aid is for people who it's going to be temporary, care is for the people who it's going to be permanent, kind of thing. Right? That's a very broad definition here. 2 programs, different admission criteria, things like that. I don't really care that you guys know that. I just wanted to explain it to you. So what happened with this kid is that he was also adopted, and so he was on Medicaid or Medicare already, because foster and adopted children get that. And he was transitioning off of it because he was going to turn a certain age. But the problem we had with it is that the government wouldn't even initiate processing his application until after he was off the program. So if his birthday is in March, the government wouldn't even begin looking at his application until April. And then they claim that they need like 200 days to make a decision. So instead of trying to be proactive and keep somebody covered, the government's like, nothing we can do, our policy. So when we talk about these programs, we set up things to try and prevent people from abusing it, but frequently it has a pretty severe negative effect. The last thing I'm going to say about all of this is that if anybody has ever tried to apply for benefits, it is a ridiculously cumbersome process. Working at the public defender, if you want a public defender, you've got to fill out like a 2-page application. And we ask you all kinds of questions that I wouldn't know the answer to as somebody who's kind of on top of it, let alone somebody who's not so on top of it. Mr. Levante, how much money did you make from dividends last year? Right? Or do you have any non-real tangible assets? Like, these are things that most people don't understand, not because they're unintelligent or anything, but because they're not New York stock traders. So we make this process a lot more difficult than it needs to be. All right, number 2, health policy. When we talk about health policy, the things we are interested in is access to care, cost control, public versus private roles, and then the major tension here is the cost versus the coverage. Healthcare is a massive issue right now. I think I told you guys I was between jobs and I had to get insurance off the marketplace. It was $1,000 a month for my family, and our deductible was $10,000, which means that before insurance would cover a single cent, we'd have to pay $10,000 to providers. So if we had this insurance for a year, it would be $22,000 that we'd have to pay out of pocket before the government would do anything, or before the insurance company would do anything. However, we don't want people in the United States dying because they can't pay their hospital bill. So if you go to an emergency room, whether you have insurance or not, whether you have money or not, you can be treated. You can be seen, you can be treated. Nobody's going to turn you away because of that. But the insurance industry has massively driven up costs. And when she was in 2nd grade, my sister had really bad pneumonia, was in the hospital for like 2 or 3 weeks. I'm sorry, when I was in 2nd grade, she was in 1st grade. And one thing that was really interesting about it is I remember my parents talking about the hospital bill. And she, when she came out of like the drug-induced coma, really, really badly wanted to brush her teeth, like you do. And so they gave her a disposable toothbrush and a little tiny tube of toothpaste. Back in 1992 or whenever this was, maybe 93, how much do you guys think that toothbrush and toothpaste cost?
Are you talking about with the bill? Or
Yeah, on the bill, what do you think it
probably like
said?
$200 for like nothing.
I mean, it's equally as ridiculous, not quite to that extreme. It was like $48 for something that at that time you could go into Walmart or Walgreens and walk out having paid about $1.50 for it. But the reason it's so expensive is because what the hospital is trying to do is they are marking things up to cover the people that come in and use the service that don't actually pay for it. So if you come in and you need that treatment and you don't have insurance, they've got to be profitable, so they're going to add in more of a margin to everything to cover those people that don't pay. The next thing they do is that they have all these deals with insurance companies where the insurance company is going to get X% off. If I have United Healthcare and I walk into Capital Region and I need a Band-Aid, for example. Interesting fun story is that in Great Britain they call a Band-Aid a plaster. So if I go in and I need a Band-Aid and it's going to cost $20, well, that's not really going to cost $20. The insurance company, because they've worked it out, is going to get like a 50% discount. So it's actually going to be billed at $10 to the insurance company. But the hospital isn't going to just take that laying down. They're not going to be like, all right, the retail price of a Band-Aid's $1. And because we're going to give it to the insurance company at 50% off, we're going to, list it at $1 and only get 50 cents back. No, they're going to automatically mark it up. So it's like $2 instead. Only then they build in that margin, so now it's like $10, and then they've got to make a lot of money for their CEOs and everything, so that's how we get to $20. When we talk about then giving healthcare to people, there's this tension between we don't want to pay for it, but we also don't want people dying in the streets because we said we're not going to treat their injuries. Education policy, we're going to always look about funding, access, equality of opportunity, and there's a debate between local versus national control. Education is a hot button issue in and of itself. We could probably do an entire lesson on the issues facing education today, but we're going to move on. And then finally, we have poverty and inequality. How much inequality is acceptable, and should policy reduce it? Excuse me for 1 second. Hello? Okay, I'll call you in a little bit. All right. Bye. Sorry about that. It was my mother-in-law. Figured it's like a Band-Aid, just rip it off. So answer it rather than wait. So the big question here becomes, should policy reduce inequality? And if so, how do we achieve that? Each area reflects the same core tension, helping people versus limiting costs and unintended consequences. Social policy debates repeat the same argument across different issue areas. Basically, who should be helped and how? Here's the scenario. The government has limited resources and must decide how to address rising inequality and costs of living. I want you guys to no, we're going to skip this activity. Sorry. I thought it'd be fun, but I want to get going faster. Instead, I want to talk to you about this really quick. I think one of the big things that I see, and I kind of want to engage you guys in this conversation a little bit. So if you're sleeping, wake up a little bit. Does anybody feel like people get handouts?
Hit what?
Get handouts. Does anybody feel like people get things and it's unfair? Yep. Who do you think gets things that's unfair? But if you don't want to answer, that's cool too. I don't want to put you on the spot or. Yeah, that's fine. I'll tell you, when I was in law school, so because I'm legally blind, the state has rehabilitation services for the blind. And if you are blind, they will provide some tuition to help you become employable. And I had a law school classmate, real nice guy. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I hold no ill will towards him. But one day he's like, Andrew, it's not fair. He had just stumbled over the statutes creating rehabilitation services for the blind. And he's like, it's not fair that you get a scholarship, basically. And I'm like, why is it not fair? He's like, because I'd like a scholarship. Exactly. But why is it unfair? And he's like, because, just because you have a vision problem, that shouldn't give you free access to education. I'm like, yeah, but there are also so many things that I have to do that you don't have to do. I'm like, how long does it take you to read a case? It takes me a lot longer. For example, here's the size at which I read my notes. It's pretty gigantic. When I read a case, it takes longer. And he's like, it's still not fair. I'm like, well, simple solution. We can poke your eyes out, and then you'll be able to see it too. Or, for example, one thing that, here's my hot take. I get a little frustrated when I go to the airport and they announce that veterans can board first. I respect veterans, but I'm like, darn it, I would have joined. I actually wanted to join the military. I had an interview with JAG when I was in law school. And unfortunately, because of my vision, I was not able to do it. If anybody wants to become a lawyer and they're thinking about what they want to do after law school, JAG is a phenomenal idea. You get tons of experience. You get to prosecute and defend. You get to do some civil, some criminal. You have a uniform allowance. They take care of all your training. It's a really cool program. Can't speak highly enough for it. But to me, since I didn't have that opportunity, I'm like, that's not fair. I couldn't have even been a veteran if I wanted to be a veteran. This sort of tension, this somebody's getting something I'm not feeling, is exactly the problem with welfare programs. That is why we have these debates, because people don't kind of understand the fact that maybe if we help some of us up, all of us will be lifted up. And so they're always afraid that somebody is getting something they're not. And to be honest with you, it's a real concern. On the flip side, nobody seems to ask the question, what don't they have that I do? Because lots of times when we're dealing with things like welfare programs, I think that if we looked at it and we compared apples to apples, nobody on Medicaid, for example, would choose to be on Medicaid. They would prefer to switch spots with me. It's really nice that they're getting insurance and they don't have to work for it and blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? That insurance isn't as good as what you get if you're working typically. And there's that pride and everything that goes into having it. So on one hand, you have somebody's getting something I'm not. On the other hand, you have, what do I have that this person doesn't? And we hear about the one argument a lot. We don't often hear about the other side.
It's like that image of the people at the fence at the ball game. And they have stools, and one person's really tall, one person's really short, and one person's medium size. If we all had the same accommodations, we all had the large stool, and the super tall person's going to be super in the air and they don't even need it. The medium person's going to be perfect, but the short person still can't see over the fence.
Right.
But if we give the short person the tall stool, the medium person the middle stool, and let the tall person have no stool because they don't need one, then everyone gets to see the ball game.
Yep. And the thing about it is, as a society, we can achieve some of our goals by trying to create that equal outcome. So for example, and I think I've spoken about this in here before, in the United States, We do not have parental leave, for example. There's no state mandated time off if you have a baby. And to the extent that employers give it, it's like a pittance. It's maybe like a month and a half. It takes a female much longer to recover from having a baby than that. Plus, there's all the things like, wanting to bond with your child so they don't become a sociopath and things like that. We need to have more kids as a big economic issue. Lower birth rates are going to end up causing countries like the United States to have major economic problems. We're seeing that in some countries already. There's a really interesting book on the subject called The End of the World is Just the Beginning, that basically equates industrialization with lower birth rates with ending globalization, and ending of globalization with basically the collapse of the current economic order. So how do we want to encourage people having kids? Well, United States and Scandinavian countries have taken two very different approaches. In the United States, they're going to give you a tax credit. So because I have 3 children, my tax credits are more than what you guys would be. You have the standard deduction, and then you're going to add credit for each child you have. Fantastic. In some countries, what they do is if you have a baby, one, there's up to 2 years of mandatory parental leave for mom and dad. You have a baby, you don't work for 2 years. Your company has to hold your job. They have to keep paying you. They also will give you a box containing all the supplies you need for your child's first year of life. Diapers, formula, bottles, outfits. It's government issue, so it's not like we're getting Lululemon outfits or monograms or anything. It's probably pretty drab looking, but at the same time you have it. And the box itself doubles as the crib for your child. There are some countries where if you have one child, you pay 25% less taxes for the remainder of your life. Up to 4 children, you can then stack that to, if you have 4 kids, you never pay taxes again. There's 2 different ways of incentivizing it. One actually tries to address the root causes of why people are not having kids. The other is just to give you a little tiny bump. And the thing that makes it difficult to have children here, and there's plenty of YouTube videos about this and articles that have been written about it, the cost of having a child today in the United States is astronomical. So you could, for example, 2 of my kids are in daycare, and right now they're in daycare, and for those 2 children, we pay several $100s more a month than we do for our mortgage. It is more expensive to send these kids to school so we can work than it is for us to pay for our house. So you can kind of see where I think we should land, but these are the sorts of debates we always have when we talk about how should we try and address this inequality? How should we try and achieve the goal we're trying to achieve? The last thing I'll note in that vein is that the legislature in Missouri did something really interesting by the dark of night a couple weeks ago. They cut money to different education and mental health programs, while at the same time authorizing funding for 2 new prisons. It is statistically shown that the more we educate a population, the less likely they are to commit violent crimes and thus need prisons. Missouri has one of the highest incarceration rates of any state in the country. The United States has one of the highest incarceration rates of any state or any country in the world.
When did this happen? A few nights ago?
I think last week or the week prior.
Sure. sorry, my mom works for a nonprofit that depends on those grants to stay, and they don't think they're gonna. They were worried about that passing.
Well, so the state budget related to the grants, it's not finalized yet.
Okay.
The Senate approved their version yesterday, and it has restored a lot of the things that the House cut, and it's going to conference committee next week. So it's not, the ink isn't dry yet. But the point is that, you know, as a state, by choosing how we're going to spend money on social welfare programs or on prisons, we're kind of saying, all right, here's where people are going to end up being. A lot of the clients I represent who have drug abuse problems, for example, really just need a good counselor. Or they need, you know, to have their meds balanced. I had a lady once that was a kleptomaniac because she got stabbed in the head. And after that traumatic brain injury, she'd see something she wanted and she'd pick it up and pocket it. And we got her into a program in Department of Corrections where they balanced her meds and got her all sorted out. And I saw her maybe a year ago or so, and she's doing fantastic. No more offenses. But if we were able to get her treatment before sending her to prison and before labeling her as a criminal, that would have been probably better for everybody. All right, so trade-offs and evaluations. Here are the key trade-offs: equity versus efficiency. We want to be fair, but we want it to be efficient. The more efficient we are, probably the less equal it's going to be. Access versus cost. We want more people to be involved in it with access, but that's going to increase the cost. Universality versus targeting. It would be awesome if we made every program for everybody, but frequently we have to target it. Short-term help. Is this just a leg up during a downturn, or is this going to be a long-term incentive? And then simplicity versus administrative control. We want it simple, but we want to be in control of it. So when we're evaluating a policy as students, kind of what I want you guys thinking about are these 5 questions. What problem is the policy solving? Who benefits from it? Who pays for it? Does it create new problems? And is it politically sustainable? Good policy analysis is not picking your favorite policy. It is understanding what each policy does well and what it costs. So public policy is about choice under constraint. Social policy makes those choices visible because it directly affects people's lives. That's that. So a couple of notes. I'm going to give you guys Monday off to work on your final assignments.
I accidentally did the review
What?
from 2 days ago and turned it in under what got canceled.
What'd you say?
When the judge came to talk to us. I reviewed that one as we turned it in until the one that got canceled.
You wrote your review and you turned it into the other paper?
Yes.
That's not a problem. I'll get it fixed. I'll get it moved over. Or I'll just grade you for that one and the other one. Next week, we'll talk about foreign policy, and that should about wrap it up. Any questions before I turn off the video? Hearing none?